The signal. The 911 dispatcher's log erases itself in real time. One moment, a call from a dead house. The next, nothing. No record. No trace. As if the voice on the other end never existed at all. 13 hours earlier, Emily Parker's fingers hovered over the headset button, blue ink staining her fingertips from a shift spent scribbling dispatch notes. The incoming call indicator flickered across her monitor in sharp, digital red. Her exhaustion lifted. Something about the signal made her spine straighten. "Charleston 911, what is your emergency?" Only static answered. Then the tapping began. Metal on metal, rhythmic and deliberate. Tap, tap. Pause, tap. The pattern held no panic, no desperation. Just that mechanical, measured percussion, as if someone was counting down the seconds before everything fell apart. Emily's hand pressed against the right ear cup of her headset. She closed her eyes to focus, drawing her shoulders inward. The air in the dispatch center seemed to thicken. Around her, the fluorescent lights hummed their monotonous song. Rows of empty desks stretched into shadow. Most of the night shift had stepped out for coffee. It was just Emily now, alone with the voice that wasn't speaking, only tapping. "Hello? I can hear you. Is there a physical threat?" Tap once for yes. One tap came back. Sharp, deliberate. Then, nothing. The screen flashed, "Call disconnected." Emily's cursor darted across the digital log, reaching for the recall button, but the entire entry vanished before her fingers touched the mouse. The address, 412 Calhoun Street, scrolled away as if it had never been entered into the system at all. The log list rearranged itself. Clean, empty, sanitized. Emily stared at the blank space on her screen where the entry had been. Her hands trembled. A heavy hand dropped onto her shoulder. She spun, her chair squeaking in protest. Mark Brennan towered over her, his shadow stretching across the desk like spilled ink. He was a 28-year veteran of the dispatch center. Thick mustache, retirement watch heavy on his wrist, eyes that had seen everything twice over. But in that moment, looking down at Emily, his expression was something she'd never quite seen before. Stone. Unmovable. Final. "Gremlins in the system, Em," he said, his voice thick and dismissive as he walked away. "Forget it. That house has been empty since Hurricane Hugo." Emily watched him disappear into the back office. She reached under her desk with a shaking hand and pulled out the small yellow legal pad she kept hidden there. The one for notes she wasn't supposed to take. Her Bic pen scratched frantically across the paper, jagged and urgent. 412 Calhoun. Morse? MB knows. She didn't know why she added those initials. Some instinct, sharp and electric, told her to. Mark Brennan. The man who had just dismissed her so casually. The man whose jaw had gone tight when she'd mentioned that address. The clock above the dispatch center read 02:14 a.m. Dawn came gray and drizzling, the kind of rain that belonged more to autumn than to spring. Emily had driven to 412 Calhoun Street without forming a plan, running on nothing but coffee and the thrumming conviction that something had to be found. The house was exactly as Mark had described it, abandoned, a Victorian skeleton rotting beneath live oak trees. The paint was peeling in long, diseased strips. Windows were boarded up with plywood that had gone black with mold. The wrought iron fence that once enclosed the property now leaned inward, as if the earth itself was trying to swallow it. But the backyard told a different story. Emily pushed through waist-high weeds, her leather boots sinking into mud that seemed to reach for her ankles. The ground had been disturbed recently. The weeds were broken, crushed down in a deliberate pattern. And at the base of a rotting oak tree, where the trunk had split into a grotesque Y shape, The earth rose in a small mound, darker than the surrounding soil, wet and fresh. Emily knelt without hesitation. Her jeans soaked up the moisture instantly, cold settling into the fabric. She clawed into the dirt with both hands, her fingernails breaking against the hardened soil, her breath visible in small clouds. Something hard pressed against her palm. Plastic. She yanked it upward. A Motorola pager. Ancient. The plastic was stained brown with earth, but the screen was intact. Cracked, but intact. Emily wiped the mud away with her thumb. The screen flickered to life. The battery still holding a charge after years in the ground. Impossible, but real. Green text glowed against the cracked LCD. Code 99. No escape. Dispatch knows. Her hands began to shake. Emily flipped the device over. On the battery cover, scratched deep into the plastic as if carved with a knife, were initials. MB. And beneath them, a date. 041-12-96. The year embedded itself in her mind. 1996. 28 years ago, the same year Mark Brennan had worked that rescue operation she'd seen fragments of in the news archives. The year 3 dispatchers went missing in a coastal storm. A twig snapped behind her. Emily spun so violently she lost her balance, falling backward into the mud, her legs splaying. A dark figure stood at the corner of the house, silhouetted against the gray dawn light. The rain fell harder now, sheets of water that obscured the figure's face, but not their posture. Rigid, controlled, predatory. Emily scrambled backward through the mud, the pager still clutched in one fist. The figure began to move, stepping out from the corner of the house with a mechanical gait. Heavy, deliberate, not hurried but inexorable. She didn't wait to see what they wanted. She ran. Her sneakers hammered the pavement, kicking up arcs of gray water that splattered against her jeans. Emily didn't look behind her. She could hear the footsteps, heavy and rhythmic, eating up the distance with the relentless pace of someone who knew they would eventually catch their prey. Her lungs burned. The rain stung her face, mixing with sweat, making her vision blur. The alley appeared to her left almost by accident. A narrow passage between 2 brick buildings, barely wide enough for a body. Emily dove into it, her trajectory wild, desperate. A wooden pallet lay across the ground. Her shin caught it, and she went down hard, sliding across gravel that tore through the fabric of her jacket and bit into her skin. Pain flared white-hot, but adrenaline swallowed it. The figure rounded the corner behind her. There was a metallic sound, a sharp clack, and a silver baton extended in the figure's hand, collapsible steel clicking into position. The hand that held it raised slowly, deliberately, with the precision of someone practiced in violence. Emily grabbed the nearest object, a rusted metal trash can lid hanging loose on its hinge. She hurled it upward just as the baton swung downward. Metal met metal with a hollow, ringing thump. The lid intercepted the strike, but the force of the blow sent it crashing into the figure's midsection, forcing the air from their lungs in a ragged gasp. The figure staggered. Emily didn't wait for them to recover. She swung the lid again, this time lower, aiming at their legs. It connected with a shin, and the figure dropped to one knee. Emily didn't hesitate. She ran for the chain-link fence at the end of the alley, her legs pumping, the pager still gripped in her hand like a talisman. She threw herself at the fence. The wire tore into her palms as she climbed, her weight making the metal sing with tension. Her sleeve caught on a jagged edge, and she heard the fabric rip, a sound that meant the figure was close enough to grab. She didn't stop. She launched herself over the fence, dropping 8 feet to the other side, landing hard on her feet. The impact sent needles of pain up through her shins, but she pushed through it. Her car was parked 2 blocks away. Her hands shook so violently she could barely get the key into the ignition. Behind her, she heard the rattle of the fence, the figure climbing. Emily turned the key. The Honda Civic's engine coughed to life. She jammed it into reverse, tires squealing against the wet asphalt. In the rearview mirror, she caught a glimpse of the figure hitting the fence, hand gripping the chain link as she pulled away. Just that one detail. The hand, the desperation of the grip. Before the gray morning swallowed them both. Emily didn't slow down until she reached her apartment. She sat at her kitchen table, shaking uncontrollably, the pager plugged into a jury-rigged charging cable she'd constructed from old computer wires. The device hummed softly as it drew power. Her laptop sat open before her, the screen casting harsh blue light across her face. She typed with mechanical precision, her training as a dispatcher overriding her fear. April 12, 96, Charleston Dispatch. The search results loaded slowly. Emily scrolled through them, her eyes scanning headlines, articles, photographs. There, a news clipping from the Charleston Gazette, dated April 13, 1996. Coastal rescue turns tragic. 3 dispatchers missing in storm. The photo showed a young man in a dispatcher's uniform, his face twisted in devastation. Mark Brennan, 20 years younger, his mustache not yet fully grown in, his eyes haunted by something that no rescue training could have prepared him for. Below the photo were 3 names underlined in the article: Miller, Vance, Sterling. Emily leaned back in her chair, her mind processing the information with the cold logic of someone who had spent years listening to emergency calls, categorizing crises, extracting meaning from chaos. Mark had been there. Mark had known them. Mark had survived something that 3 other people hadn't. She dug deeper. An internal memo leaked onto a message board for former government employees. The document was marked with a red, classified stamp. But the digital archive had never been properly scrubbed. The memo outlined something called Code 99 Protocol, a system designed to isolate critical communications from unauthorized listeners. The language was bureaucratic, sanitized, but the handwritten margin note was not. Silencing the signal. Emily's phone vibrated on the table. She jumped, her entire body going rigid. The screen lit up. Mark Brennan, work. She stared at the caller ID without moving. The phone vibrated again, insistent. She answered without speaking. On the other end, breathing, heavy and measured. A siren wailed in the background, distant but distinct. Then, a click. The call ended. Emily lowered the phone slowly. She looked out the window of her apartment, her eyes moving down to the street below. A black SUV with tinted windows sat idling across from her building. It hadn't been there when she'd arrived home an hour ago. She was certain of that fact. The SUV's engine rumbled softly, and she could see the exhaust plume rising from its tailpipe into the damp morning air. They knew she knew. The question was, what exactly did she know? Emily gripped the steering wheel of her Honda so hard, her knuckles turned white. She sat in a parking garage 2 levels below the dispatch center, watching the back exit where off-duty staff came and went. Her laptop was open on the passenger seat, the photo of young Mark Brennan still glowing on the screen. She had no plan. She only knew that Mark held answers, and she was out of time. Then he appeared. Mark emerged from the back door at 11:47 a.m., carrying a heavy cardboard box. He was looking over his shoulder, nervous, moving with the careful deliberation of someone attempting to appear casual while in a state of high alert. Emily opened her car door. She called out his name. A figure stepped from behind a concrete pillar. Not Mark. Not anyone she recognized. The man had no badge, no ID visible, but he wore the dark jacket of station security, and his hand was already moving toward the device at his belt. A taser. Emily saw it with absolute clarity, the electrodes gleaming in the fluorescent light, the ugly promise of incapacitation. She ducked. The taser prongs sang past her head, missing her by inches. They struck her car door instead, metal sparking against metal with a sharp ping. Emily lunged forward, driving her shoulder into the man's gut with every ounce of force she could generate. They went down together, bodies slamming onto the concrete floor of the garage. Oil stains painted the ground beneath them. Emily fought on instinct, her dispatcher training suddenly useless in the face of pure physical violence. The man's hand closed around her throat. His grip was professional, educated in the art of strangulation. Emily's vision began to blur. Her fingers scrabbled against his jacket, searching for anything. There, a red fire extinguisher mounted on the garage wall. She couldn't reach it. Not like this. But she could see it. With her last ounce of strength, Emily drove her heel backward, striking the concrete floor and using the rebound to roll her body sideways. The man's grip tightened, but it shifted. For just a moment, the pressure eased enough for her to gasp a breath. She twisted her arm, found the edge of a car bumper nearby, and used it as a lever to heave herself upward. The man went with her, trying to maintain his hold. That was his mistake. The fire extinguisher hung on the wall just 3 feet away now. Emily reached up, her face turning purple from the strangled blood flow, and grabbed the heavy cylinder. She swung it backward with everything she had left. The impact was tremendous. The man's grip on her throat released instantly. He fell sideways, his forehead connecting with the concrete in a wet, final sound. Emily collapsed to her knees, gasping, her throat aflame with pain. A radio crackled on the ground beside the unconscious man. Emily grabbed it with trembling hands. A voice came through, crackling with static. Status on the whistleblower. Group B is moving in. The response came back, filtered through layers of encryption. Exterminate the signal. Emily's hands went numb. She left the radio on the ground and stumbled toward her car. The cabin appeared through the marsh grass like a structure from a fever dream. Weathered wood, sagging roof, windows that resembled closed eyes. Emily pushed her Honda to the end of a dirt road and approached on foot, a heavy wrench clutched in her hands. She had tracked Mark's cell phone signal using an old GPS unit from her apartment. It had led her here, to this isolated structure in the marshlands, 20 miles outside the city. She kicked the cabin door open. Mark was inside, sitting in a wooden chair in the center of the room. But he wasn't alone. 3 figures emerged from the shadows. 2 elderly men and a woman, all of them wearing old dispatch headsets around their necks like medals of service. The woman had gray hair cut short, a weathered face, and eyes that held the particular exhaustion of someone who had been hiding for a very long time. Mark didn't move from his chair. He didn't reach for a weapon. He simply held up his hand in a gesture that was neither threatening nor aggressive. Just a plea. I didn't bury that pager to hide it, Emily, he said, his voice rough with age and something deeper. I buried it to keep the frequency alive. Emily kept the wrench raised, her arms shaking. Where are Miller and Vance? Dead, the old woman said. Her voice was surprisingly steady. Drowned in that 1996 storm. The rescue operation was real. The drowning was real. But our recovery was not. We never made it back. The signal went silent because we went silent. Officially, Mark gestured to the woman. This is Sterling. The other 2 you see here are Vance's brother and Miller's cousin. We've been keeping them hidden because once the system knows you're alive, it finishes what it started." "Why?" Emily asked. "Why keep them hidden? Why keep any of this secret?" Mark stood slowly from his chair. "Because in 1996, we were going to blow the whistle. We discovered what your father had done, what Code 99 really was. We'd compiled evidence. We had dates, times, recordings. We were going to take it to the FBI on April 15th of that year. But before we could, the system moved against us." The cabin seemed to tilt. Emily's mind refused to process the information. Your father, John Parker, Chief of Systems, dead for 6 years, cancer eating through his body with the same relentless precision that had characterized his engineering. "He built the cage," Sterling said softly. "Your father didn't just design the dispatch system. He designed a mechanism for silencing dissent. Calls that came in to certain addresses routed to deadlines. Recordings that deleted themselves. Whistleblowers who disappeared before they could speak." A red laser dot appeared on Mark's chest. Emily's scream caught in her throat. The laser traced upward, finding Mark's heart. She spun toward the window just as a suppressed rifle cracked. The sound wasn't loud, barely louder than a cough, but the effect was immediate and violent. Glass exploded inward. A hole appeared in the cabin wall next to Mark's head, dust exploding from the impact. Mark was already moving, shoving the elderly survivors toward a back exit. "Run," he commanded. "Move." The marsh became a liquid chaos. Black mud, deeper than Emily had anticipated, sucked at her boots with every step. The rain had intensified into a downpour that reduced visibility to mere feet. Behind them, she could hear the crack of gunfire. Suppressed rounds cutting through the reeds with a sound like dried branches snapping. Emily helped Sterling through the marsh vegetation, moving as quickly as the elderly woman's legs would allow. Behind them, Mark had returned to the cabin, a double-barrel shotgun in his hands. He stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the orange flames that had already begun to consume the interior. The hitmen were closing in, moving with the precise coordination of professionals. Mark gave Emily a single nod. Final. Absolute. Emily grabbed Sterling's arm and pulled her deeper into the marsh. They didn't look back, though the image would stay with Emily for the rest of her life. Mark in that doorway, the shotgun raised, the flames climbing behind him like reaching hands. The marsh went on forever. The survivors stumbled through it. Sterling, the brother, the cousin. Their bodies struggling against the weight of 30 years of hiding, 30 years of living underground, of watching the sun rise through basement windows, of listening to the city's dispatch frequency on shortwave radios, hoping for justice that never came. Emily found an old flare gun in a bag that Sterling had managed to grab during their escape. She fired it into the air, the red light exploding above the marsh and painting everything in blood-colored shadow. It was an act of desperation more than strategy, but it had an immediate effect. The gunfire intensified, the hitmen converging toward the flare, trying to eliminate any witnesses to what they'd done. One of them found Emily in the marsh vegetation. A man in tactical gear lunged from the reeds, his helmet gleaming in the fading flare light. Emily swung the empty flare gun, striking his helmet with a metallic clang. They went down together into the black water, their bodies splashing, mud and slime coating every inch of exposed skin. The man tried to pin her, his hand searching for her throat. Emily's fingers closed around something hard beneath the water, a rock. She slammed it upward, connecting with what felt like his knee. The man screamed, a sound that cut through the rain and chaos with terrible clarity. Emily pulled herself free and crawled toward where she could hear Sterling's voice calling her name. Behind them, the cabin was now fully engulfed in flames. The fire rose into the dark sky like a reaching hand, consuming everything: the evidence, the blueprints, the recordings, the truth. Consuming, Mark. The radio tower base rose from the marsh, like a monument to forgotten technology. Emily and the survivors stumbled into the concrete bunker beneath it, water streaming from their clothes, their bodies shaking from cold and trauma. There was a metal trunk in the corner, covered in rust but still locked. Emily's hands moved on autopilot. She raised the wrench and brought it down onto the padlock. Metal fractured. The lock fell away. Inside the trunk lay blueprints. Dozens of them. Schematics for the dispatch system, for routing protocols, for something called silent routing and signal eradication. In the corner of one blueprint, a signature. John Parker, Chief of Systems. Her father's handwriting. Below the blueprints, a reel-to-reel tape in an old plastic case. Emily found an ancient player in a corner of the bunker and threaded the tape. When she pressed play, her father's voice filled the bunker, crackling and distorted, but unmistakably his. The system must be clean. No dissent, no whistleblowers. Code 99 is for the greater good. The operation in Charleston proves that decisive action can be taken. The signal must be controlled. The message must be ours alone. The voice of the people is noise. Our voice is necessary. The tape continued for another 20 minutes, detailing the specifics of how to identify potential whistleblowers, how to intercept their calls, how to make them disappear. The clinical precision of it was more horrifying than any rage could have been. Emily rewound the tape and played it again, unable to accept what she was hearing. This was her father, the man who had taught her to ride a bicycle, the man who had brought her to work at the dispatch center, proud that she was following in his footsteps. The architect of a system designed to silence the voices of everyone who tried to speak the truth. Sterling's footsteps echoed through the bunker. The old woman looked at the blueprints, at the tape player, at Emily's face. Without saying anything, she placed a hand on Emily's shoulder. Your father didn't just build the system, Emily. He built the cage. We weren't lost in a storm. He routed our calls to nowhere. Above them, the sounds of vehicles arriving, engines cutting off, doors slamming, the distinctive click of weapons being loaded, dozens of them, a sound Emily's trained ear recognized instantly from hours of dispatch calls documenting armed interventions. The bunker had always been a trap. The trunk, the blueprints, the tape. They had been placed here deliberately, a cruel gift designed to break Emily's spirit before they executed her. They wanted her to know what her father had done. They wanted her to carry that knowledge to the grave. Emily stood up from the tape player. She looked at Sterling, at the two men huddled in the shadows, at the blueprints and the evidence of her family's complicity in institutional murder. Stay here, she said. Don't come up, whatever happens. She climbed the concrete steps toward the rain and darkness. They took her quickly. Two men grabbed her arms before she'd even cleared the bunker entrance, zip-tying her wrists with plastic straps so tight her hands began to numb. They dragged her back down into the bunker, back into the cold concrete hell beneath the earth. A man in a suit was waiting for her. The city commissioner. Emily recognized him from television appearances, a smooth-talking administrator who had overseen the modernization of the city's infrastructure over the past decade. He held a silver Zippo lighter in his right hand, flicking it open and shut with a rhythmic clink-clack. The sound was metronome precise, the sound of someone entirely in control. The commissioner watched Emily without speaking as one of his men poured gasoline over the blueprints. The smell was overpowering, chemical and acrid. Emily's eyes watered from the fumes. Your father understood something that very few people ever grasp, the commissioner said, his voice cultivated and smooth. The system requires cleanliness. Dissent is an infection. Whistleblowers are a plague. Code 99 exists because mercy is a luxury we cannot afford. He flicked the Zippo again. Clink, clack. The light danced in his eyes. The signal must be silenced, Ms. Parker. Your father knew this. Mark Brennan refused to accept it. And now you're discovering the same hard truths that got all of them killed. Emily said nothing. She was working her wrists against the plastic straps, sawing, testing their tension. The plastic was too tight. Her hands were already going numb. The commissioner raised the Zippo higher, preparing to light it. Emily's fingers found something unexpected. In her boot, where she'd tucked it during the chaos, the pager. The cracked screen. She'd forgotten about it completely. The small device was still there, the screen still partially intact, and the plastic edge was sharp. Emily began to saw. The plastic straps were thicker than she'd anticipated, but the pager screen had a jagged edge from the impact it had sustained. She worked her wrists backward, pressing the sharp plastic against the zip ties, moving with the careful precision of someone who understood that her next few seconds would determine whether she lived or died. The ties began to fray. The commissioner was speaking about something. The modernization of the system, the new safeguards, the protocols that had been put in place to ensure that the Code 99 experience of the 1990s could never happen again. But Emily wasn't listening. She was focused entirely on the sensation of the plastic straps failing under pressure. The zip ties snapped. Emily lunged for the trunk. Her fingers found the Morse key her father had left buried in the archives, a manual transmitter, an old emergency device that could broadcast directly into the city's emergency frequency. She tapped frantically, sending out a sequence: tap, tap, pause, tap, tap. The pattern was universal. The pattern was SOS. A voltage meter on the wall jumped into the red. Alarm bells began to wail throughout the bunker. Above them, Emily could hear the impact of running feet, the shouting of confused officers. The commissioner's cool composure fractured for just a moment. That was enough. The radio tower rose 100 feet into the rain-soaked night. Emily had made it up here by finding an access ladder in the chaos that had erupted when her Morse code signal had triggered a citywide emergency alert. Police and emergency services across Charleston had responded to what they thought was a genuine distress call coming from the old radio tower. The confusion had given her just enough time to climb. The commissioner had followed. They struggled on the metal catwalk that ringed the top of the tower, rain hammering down on them both, lightning flashing across the sky with electric violence. The commissioner was strong, but Emily had rage. She had betrayal. She had the knowledge that her father had built a system to kill people like the commissioner. And then this man had taken that system and wielded it for his own purposes. The commissioner tried to push her over the rail. Emily drove her elbow backward, connecting with his face, feeling the satisfying crunch of bone. Blood spattered across her cheek. She grabbed his silk tie, that beautiful, expensive piece of fabric that screamed of power and wealth, and wrapped it around the metal railing. She held the headset to his mouth, the same headset she'd been wearing in the dispatch center. The frequency was still open, still broadcasting. She could hear sirens approaching below, could feel the convergence of law enforcement and emergency services, all of them responding to the codes she'd transmitted. "Tell the city what you did," she commanded. The commissioner struggled, his face turning purple, his words choked off by the fabric of his own tie. Emily pulled the headset closer. "All of it. Everyone needs to hear." For the next 3 minutes, the commissioner talked. Between gasps for air and desperate attempts to free himself, he outlined the entire scope of Code 99. He named names. He described operations. He detailed the murder of 3 dispatchers in 1996, the suppression of evidence, the ongoing mechanisms of control that had been built into the city's infrastructure. He talked about Mark Brennan and what had happened in that cabin. He talked about people he'd ordered killed. He talked about his father's role in building the system and his own role in maintaining it. Below them, in dispatch centers across the city, every officer, every dispatcher, every emergency responder heard every word. The frequency had been open the entire time. The transmission had been recorded from the moment Emily had sent that Morse code signal. The commissioner's words became a legal confession, a permanent record, evidence that could not be erased or deleted by any system built by men like her father. When his voice gave out completely, Emily released him. She let the tie support him, let him hang there on the catwalk at the top of the radio tower, 50 feet above the marsh below. Police were already flooding the area, surrounding the tower base. Helicopters were descending from the sky, their rotors cutting through the rain like enormous knives. Emily sat down on the metal catwalk, rain streaming down her face, and waited for them to bring her down. Morning light streamed through the windows of the new dispatch center. Sunlight that seemed to carry the weight of truth, the heaviness of revelation. Emily sat in a dispatch seat that was technically not hers yet, though the paperwork would formalize her appointment within the week. She'd been reinstated pending investigation. The investigation had concluded almost immediately. The evidence was too clear, too overwhelming. A framed photograph sat on her desk. Mark and the survivors, taken just before the commissioner's arrest. They were standing in front of the radio tower, all of them blinking in harsh sunlight, all of them looking like people who had just awakened from a 30-year nightmare. Mark wasn't in this photograph. Mark had died in the cabin, his body consumed by flames. But his brother had identified him through dental records. A funeral was being planned. There would be honor in it. There would be truth in it. That small comfort, the existence of truth at last, would have to be enough. Emily's headset chirped with an incoming call. She answered with the words she'd been saying since the center reopened under new protocols, new staff, new security measures designed to prevent any future abuse of the system. Charleston Emergency Dispatch. What is your emergency? A voice came through the line. Young, clear, the voice of a child. Thank you for finding us, the child said. The number on Emily's screen showed 412 Calhoun Street. Copy that, Emily said softly. We finally hear you. The signal held steady. No deletions, no erasure, no invisible hands reaching through the system to silence what was being said. The child's voice continued, speaking words that would be recorded permanently, archived forever, protected by protocols that acknowledged truth rather than concealing it. Emily listened. The dispatch center hummed around her, other operators taking other calls, other voices reaching out into the void and being answered. The system was working as it had been intended before her father had corrupted it. The system was carrying voices instead of silencing them. A single tear rolled down her cheek. Then she turned her attention to the next call coming in, her fingers steady on the keyboard, her voice clear and precise. Outside the window, the city of Charleston moved on. No longer haunted by the ghost of Code 99, no longer trapped in the cage her father had built, Emily's hands rested on the dispatch console, blue ink stains still visible beneath her fingernails. And she listened to the city speak,